In the year 771 BCE, the capital Haojing of the Zhou dynasty was engulfed in flames. That night, the sound of drums echoed endlessly beneath a sky glowing red as the Quanrong tribes from the west suddenly stormed the city. The gates were shattered, guards fell in layers, and the palace descended into chaos under torchlight and cries of terror. King Yu of Zhou was killed, and the royal house that had existed for centuries collapsed in an instant like a piece of silk torn apart. From that moment, the order of Western Zhou, an order built upon the sacred authority of the Son of Heaven, officially crumbled. The surviving court was forced to flee eastward, moving the capital to Luoyi. Leaving their ancestral land was not merely an act of escaping war, but a milestone declaring a new era. Eastern Zhou began. But Eastern Zhou did not inherit the splendor of Western Zhou. It opened an age of weakness, where the Son of Heaven held only the title ruler of all under heaven, but had completely lost the ability to control the feudal states. Every right and feudal regulation that had once bound the realm under a common order now remained only as echoes in old writings. The weakening of the central government immediately made the feudal states realize that real power lay in their own hands. States such as Qi, Jin, Qin, and Lu, which once depended on the edicts and rituals of the Zhou court, now strengthened their own armies, collected their own taxes, and organized their own administrations. They used the pretext of supporting Zhou to expand influence, but in truth were steadily escaping the control of the Son of Heaven. The dependent feudal system of Western Zhou, where land and authority were distributed by bloodline, began to fall apart. It was replaced by a new order where military strength and leadership ability determined status. In this situation, regional powers began to claim hegemony. The strong became leaders of whole regions. The weak relied on alliances to survive. All of the central plains shifted into a deeply fragmented state. More than 100 states, large and small, crowded together, sometimes allying, sometimes warring, none willing to stand beneath a powerless Son of Heaven. This chaos unintentionally opened a brilliant era of thought. When old rites no longer worked, scholars were forced to find answers to the question, how to govern a state. Thus, schools of philosophy from Confucianism and Taoism to legalism and Mohism emerged, creating the vibrant age of the 100 schools of thought. All these changes combined to form an irreversible reality. The central authority of the Zhou had withered, and a new age, the age of endless warfare, where feudal states decided the fate of the realm themselves, had officially begun. It was the blood-soaked dawn of the spring and autumn period, where Chinese history entered a turbulent era lasting more than 5 centuries. An age in which, from then on, every state, every ruler, and every battlefield became indispensable pieces of the story of China entering an age of chaos. When central authority collapsed, a vast political vacuum emerged in the Central Plains. With no Son of Heaven strong enough to maintain order, the feudal lords were forced to choose for themselves a leader worthy enough to mediate conflicts and resist foreign tribes. From this, the concept of the hegemon was born, a leader who upheld stability on behalf of all under heaven. But this title did not come from bloodline, only from strength. Only those with strategic brilliance, military might, and the ability to unite the feudal states could become a true hegemon. The first to achieve this was Duke Huan of Qi, the renowned ruler of the state of Qi. Under the guidance of the brilliant advisor Guanzhong, he reformed government, strengthened the military, developed the economy, and gradually led smaller states in resisting foreign invasions. In the eyes of the realm, he was not merely a powerful king, but a figure capable of coordinating peace. Major alliances, such as those at Kuan Water and Mount Qi, were led by him, allowing Qi to become the banner that ushered in the era of the 5 hegemons. But the title of hegemon was never granted peacefully. As soon as Qi rose to prominence, it immediately clashed with the ambitions of other states such as Jin, Chu, and Song. Every state sought dominance, making war inevitable. Battles along the Sai River and prolonged confrontations between Qi and the Western states bore the marks of a struggle for supremacy. Chariots grinding the earth, armies fighting inch by inch, and generals constantly shifting tactics to seize every breath of survival. Yet the battlefield was only half the game. A true hegemon had to triumph through diplomacy as well. And this was where the political artistry of the spring and autumn era reached its peak. Major states competed to forge alliances, sign pacts, send princesses in marriage, offer tribute, and even use spies to sabotage rival coalitions. Some assemblies of feudal lords appeared solemn and peaceful, but beneath the facade lay the quiet sound of blades leaving their sheaths, stratagems exchanged through glances and smiles. An oath of alliance could become the foundation of a new power block, or merely a veil for a sudden assault. Such competition caused the ancient feudal order established in the Western Zhou to collapse entirely. No one relied on bloodline or ritual anymore. Everything depended on power and strategy. Strong states became new centers of authority, while weak states were forced to rely on alliances or be swallowed whole. Thus, the Spring and Autumn period was not merely a shift of power, but a complete restructuring of ancient Chinese civilization. From this brutal contest, a new world slowly emerged. A world where a state was no longer the hereditary domain of nobles, but a structured war machine. The seeds of the great warring states' powers, Qin, Jin, Chu, were all planted amid the fierce competition of the five hegemons era. And as the hegemons faded, the contest would no longer stop at claiming supremacy, but move toward a far greater goal, unifying all under heaven through iron and blood. When the era of the five hegemons had just taken shape and the feudal lords began struggling for influence, the spring and autumn battlefield gradually became the place where a harsh truth was laid bare. The old order based on rituals and the prestige of the Son of Heaven was no longer strong enough to bind reality. One of the moments that ignited this realization was the Battle of Ziju, a battle not large in scale, but devastating in its impact on the Zhou court's authority, and marking a turning point in ancient Chinese military thought. In the year 707 BCE, the Zhou court still believed that all under heaven would heed their word. The Son of Heaven, though weakened after the Quanrong chaos, still viewed himself as the legal center of the world. But the feudal states, especially Qi, no longer looked at the Son of Heaven with the reverence of the flourishing Western Zhou era. Clashes of power, along with the hegemonic ambitions of Duke Huan of Qi and his generals, made conflict between Qi and Zhou inevitable. And when their forces faced each other on the fields of Ziju, history revealed a new chapter, a chapter of broken authority and tactical innovation. On the morning of the battle, mist still covered the ground. From afar came the sound of horse hooves, mixed with the beat of war drums. The Zhou formation entered the field with the bearing of a court that once ruled the Liswoods. All under heaven, bronze chariots arranged in traditional formations, banners held in strict order, nobles leading the front ranks, soldiers believing they were fighting for the Son of Heaven, the symbol of power atop the political pyramid. Opposite them, the Qi army did not flaunt grandeur, but was thoroughly prepared. Qi's commanders did not see this battle as a lesson in ritual decorum for a vassal state, but as a life and death contest between two powers. Instead of following the ancient rules of warfare, attacking the enemy center, Qi chose the tactic of striking both flanks, a breakthrough maneuver for its time. From a panoramic view, the battlefield appeared like a massive painting, the dry earth trembling under hundreds of chariots, red dust rising to obscure the sky, thousands of soldiers facing each other in tense silence. But if one looked closely at the Qi formation, it was clear they intentionally widened their left and right wings, gradually enveloping the central zone where Zhou concentrated its strongest forces. When the war drums sounded the third time, chaos erupted. Zhou chariots surged forward like metallic beasts, their wheels grinding over rock and soil. But the Qi soldiers did not fear them. They blocked the momentum of the chariots with compact, agile infantry units, and from both flanks, their cavalry simultaneously pressed in, cutting off the Zhou army's movement routes. That moment signaled the decline of the chariot, the noble symbol of the Western Zhou, and the rise of flexible infantry, which would dominate Chinese battlefields until the Qin Han period. A close view of those deadly moments reveals the transformation of the era. Soldiers, sweat mixed with dust. The Qi general stood atop a high mound, eyes sharp as blades, watching every subtle shift on the battlefield. When he saw the Zhou troops beginning to fall into confusion after being hit from the flanks, he immediately ordered a barrage of arrows to seal their retreat. Arrows flew through the air with whistling wind, piercing chariot frames, armor plates, and arms raised in desperate defense. On the Zhou side, noble commanders accustomed to leading with rituals were stunned by the fluid tactics that defied their understanding. They could not comprehend why Qi, a feudal state once granted its fief by the Zhou court, dared use such calculated maneuvers to strike directly at their elite forces. They also could not understand why their chariots, the mighty weapons of the Western Zhou, now stumbled against Qi's well-positioned spears and crossbows. When the encirclement tightened completely, screams echoed across the battlefield. Many Zhou soldiers were driven into a shallow ravine, trampling each other in terror. Chariots lost wheels, overturned, and crashed to the ground like giant metal carcasses. The smell of blood, sweat, and scorched earth rose in suffocating waves. The Battle of Ziju ended without a prolonged pursuit. Zhou retreated in chaos, leaving thousands of bodies on the field. It was not merely a military defeat, it was a direct blow to the prestige of the Son of Heaven, whose authority relied solely on ritual. When news of the defeat reached Luoyi, silence fell over the Zhou court. Officials began to doubt. Other feudal states sneered. The Son of Heaven no longer possessed real power, only an empty title. From that battle onward, the spring and autumn order shifted completely. The feudal lords understood, no one rules all under heaven with titles anymore. Only those with real strength can hold their land. After Ziju, countless states began reorganizing their armies. Chariots no longer held the central role. Infantry, cavalry, and archers became more systematically organized into fixed units. The battlefield was no longer a place for nobles to display chariot riding skills, but a place for practical tactics, flanking, encirclement, division, feigned retreat, ambushes, and strikes at supply lines. From the perspective of modern scholarship, the Battle of Ziju was not only militarily significant. It symbolized the transfer of power from the central authority to the regional states, or more precisely, from the Son of Heaven to the feudal lords. If the Quanrong chaos toppled the foundations of the Western Zhou, then the Battle of Ziju was the death knell for the idea that the Son of Heaven is supreme. Political, military, and social thought from that point onward shifted in a new direction, one of interstate competition rather than central dependence. The battle also foreshadowed what the Warring States era would later demonstrate clearly. A nation's survival no longer depended on lineage, but on organizational capacity, reform efficiency, and tactical ingenuity. That field at Ziju, where red dust rose to stain the sky, witnessed the moment Chinese history departed from its ancient model and entered an age where real strength determined everything. No one knew that from that small battle, a great storm would rise, sweeping all under heaven into a fierce cycle of reforms, alliances, betrayals, and wars, eventually leading to the Warring States period, where the spear point, the stratagem, and the will of the state became the new measure of power. After decisive battles such as Tuku, the feudal states gradually realized that victory no longer came from bloodline or ritual, but from thought, organization, and reform. It was in this moment of chaos that China entered one of the most brilliant intellectual eras in its history, the age of the 100 schools, where ideas blossomed like a bamboo forest in the rainy season. Confucius traveled among the feudal states, speaking of governing through virtue and ritual, attempting to save a decaying order. Laozi sought the simplicity of the Tao, seeing natural order as the way to keep the state from turmoil. Wandering scholars, some spoke of righteousness, others of military strategy, while some advocated strict laws to restore discipline. They did not merely debate on paper. They entered courts, walked into military camps, and directly influenced the workings of each major state. From this era, military thought also reached an important turning point. Strategists no longer saw war as the rigid act of lining up troops, charging, seizing the city, but as a comprehensive contest of wits, using strategy to defeat strength, using position to defeat numbers. The use of schemes, diplomacy, espionage, defection, and breaking alliances became common. Victory shifted from the strong defeating the weak to the calculating defeating the reckless. At the same time, military technology changed so rapidly that history records it as a revolution. Chariots, the symbol of Western Zhou nobility, gradually gave way to flexible infantry, mobile cavalry, and Above all, the widespread use of iron weapons. Each small improvement created a great advantage, turning the spring and autumn battlefield from a stage for aristocratic rivalry into an arena where professional armies, trained with high intensity, confronted one another. This combination of ideas and technology changed the nature of war itself. Now, fighting battles was not only about seizing territory, but also managing population, operating the economy, building logistics, and reforming government. A state that wished to survive needed a strong administrative apparatus, had to know how to mobilize its people, and had to know how to organize campaigns that lasted for months, things the Zhou court had never needed before. These foundations not only determined the fate of the spring and autumn era, but also prepared for a harsher age ahead. When entering the Warring States period, the states would apply all the essence of the spring and autumn era, statecraft, internal reform, flexible strategy, to build comprehensive machines of war, in which military, political, and economic strength fused into one. And from there, Chinese warfare was no longer merely a clash between two armies, but a contest between two state models, where the one that organized better and reformed more decisively would determine the fate of the realm. When the ideas of reform and new state models had been planted throughout the spring and autumn period, history was preparing to enter a far more brutal chapter. The crucial milestone occurred in the year 403 BCE, when the state of Jin, a great power that once dominated the Central Plains, was divided by three aristocratic clans into Han, Zhao, and Wei. This event was not only the collapse of a powerful noble house, but also the official reshaping of the political map. At this time, the balance of the realm narrowed to only 7 major forces: Qin, Qi, Yan, Han, Zhao, and Wei. 7 mountains of power confronted one another in a landscape where each state believed it had a chance to unify all under heaven. As soon as the Warring States period began, warfare immediately changed in scale. The small battles of the spring and autumn era, a few thousand or tens of thousands of troops, were now replaced by campaigns mobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Battlefields were no longer confined to disputes between two states, but spread across all directions. To the west, Qin fought nomadic tribes and pushed into Bashu. To the north, Zhao and Yan confronted the Xiongnu. To the south, Chu expanded to the Lingnan region. These campaigns stretched on for many years, with multiple fronts active at once, requiring every state to prepare grain, supply routes, relay stations, communication systems, and weapons on an unprecedented scale. Within this expansion, military technology exploded like a great wind. Iron was smelted in vast quantities, turning spears, halberds, and arrowheads into mass-produced weapons. The crossbow could pierce armor from afar, and tactics, using large infantry formations combined with agile cavalry, completely replaced the outdated aristocratic chariots. Each army was not just a crude force, but was organized into disciplined units with clear hierarchy and trained rigorously to execute orders precisely amid swirling smoke and fire. However, the foundation that allowed states to enter this era of large-scale warfare came not only from weapons, but also from deep political and military reforms. Han, Zhao, and Wei revised taxation, measured lands, and recruited soldiers according to household registration to ensure abundant manpower. Qi reformed its bureaucracy, promoting individuals based on merit rather than lineage. Qin, under the guidance of strict reforms, transformed from a frontier region into a gigantic war machine. Its legal code was severe, rewards and punishments clear, and its army selected based on battlefield merit. States that embraced innovation grew strong like tigers and leopards. Those clinging to old traditions were gradually swept from the board. Inside the palaces of the warring states, the tension was no less fierce than on the battlefield. The cold corridors flickering with torchlight were places where factions negotiated, betrayed, and battled for influence with the ruler. A single appointment of a general, an arranged diplomatic marriage, or even one secret letter shifting factional power could change the course of an entire nation. The rulers had to guard against enemies at the borders, while fearing that someone within the court was silently plotting to topple them from the throne. Thus, the Warring States period was not only a war of spears and blades, but also a war waged through every glance, every whisper, every soft footstep on cold stone floors. All these transformations together created an era in which warfare was no longer a spontaneous response, but the very breath of the age. Every state became a colossal machine operating for its own survival. The realm seemed drawn into an unstoppable vortex of ambition, reform, calculation, and iron. The path to unification had appeared, but to reach it, the seven great powers would have to continue through a series of brutal conflicts in which the victor advanced and the defeated vanished forever from history. When the Warring States period entered the 3rd century BCE, the realm was exhausted by endless struggles for dominance. Yet among countless battles stretching from north to south, none left a deeper, harsher, or more decisive impact than the Battle of Changping between Zhou and Qin in the 260 BCE. This was not merely a military clash, it was the ultimate test between two state models, two ideological systems, and two divergent paths of power. And when the red dust of the battlefield settled, the realm stepped into a new era in which the fate of China was almost sealed. The tragedy began in the region of Shandong, a strategic land between Qin and Zhou. After defeating Han, Qin seized control of this area. But the people and officials of Shandong refused to submit to Qin and instead gifted their land to Zhou, hoping Zhou would resist the Western threat. Zhou could not ignore such a strategic opportunity, nor reject a region that willingly sought its protection. What seemed like a righteous decision inadvertently pushed Zhou into the wolf's jaws. Qin immediately mobilized a massive army toward Shandong, beginning a conflict that lasted 2 years. At first, Zhou held the advantage under General Lian Po, who built strong defensive lines and avoided decisive battles. He knew that Qin's reformed, disciplined forces posed a severe threat, and time worked in Zhou's favor. But in the Zhou court, trust was as fragile as frost. Qin understood Lian Po was difficult to defeat and thus employed a strategy of sowing discord, spreading rumors that they feared Zhao Kuo, the son of the legendary Zhao She, who had once defeated Qin. The rumor spread like wildfire, shaking King Zhao's confidence. Opportunistic courtiers deepened his doubts. In the end, Lian Po was replaced by Zhao Kuo, a young, talented but arrogant commander with no real battlefield experience. This decision is often regarded as the first fatal wound inflicted upon the state. Once Zhao Kuo took command, the situation reversed. Unlike Lian Po, he believed in swift victory. He dismantled the defensive strategy and marched hundreds of thousands of troops into open battle. Qin was waiting for exactly this. General Bai Qi, known as the human-slaughtering god, unleashed a plan remembered for millennia. Bai Qi avoided direct engagement and instead used encirclement tactics. One force lured Zhao inward, the other cut off supply and retreat. Changping's terrain of hills, ravines, and deep valleys was a natural labyrinth where any army ignorant of the landscape would fall into traps. Zhao Kuo failed to see that his enemy did not seek immediate battle, but intended to seal the door behind the Zhao army. When the trap closed, war drums thundered from the hills and Qin chariots charged like a burst dam. Zhao realized too late they were locked in the center. No retreat, no escape. Qin archers lined the high ground, sending volleys of arrows like iron rain. Zhao soldiers who survived the barrage attempted counterattacks but were crushed by Qin's elite infantry. Blood soaked the slopes, mixing with dust into thick red mud. Under the setting sun lay tens of thousands of corpses, shattered chariots, broken banners, and endless cries of agony. By nightfall, Zhao was fully encircled. They built earthworks and trenches to survive, but supplies dwindled quickly. The camp's atmosphere grew heavy. Children of accompanying families cried from hunger. Soldiers sighed into the cold wind. With each passing day, hope thinned to a thread. Meanwhile, Bai Qi tightened the siege, refusing open battle to avoid losses, waiting for the enemy to starve. This was the essence of Warring States warfare, not to destroy the enemy by direct combat, but by severing life itself. When Zhao Kuo attempted a desperate breakout, Bai Qi positioned archers, locked the infantry, and sent cavalry crashing forward. Arrows pierced Zhao Kuo's armor, and he fell in the chaos. Leaderless, Zhao's forces collapsed completely. The aftermath became one of the bloodiest tragedies in Chinese history. More than 400,000 Zhao soldiers were captured. For many states, such a vast number of prisoners could be useful. But to Qin, they were a future threat, whether released or kept. Bai Qi made a brutal decision, executing them all to annihilate Zhao's military strength. The earthen mounds of Changping later became symbols of buried souls, and generations told stories of faint cries rising on moonlit nights. Changping not only devastated Zhao's manpower, but shattered its spirit. A nation once equal to Qin became crippled, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, nearly half its strength. Its court fell into chaos, its people into fear, and its surviving generals carried a lifelong dread of Qin. Qin's victory was not solely by Qi's doing, but the result of a fully reformed system. Strict laws, professional armies, clear rewards and punishments, abundant granaries, and iron discipline. Zhao, by contrast, suffered from court disputes, poor decisions, inexperienced commanders, and lack of long-term preparation. After Changping, the realm understood a single truth. Qin had surpassed all rivals. No state could face this war machine directly. Zhao's collapse paved the way for Qin's final goal, unifying all under heaven through iron and blood. Thus, the Battle of Changping was not merely a military campaign, but a turning point in history. It ended the era when other states could restrain Qin and open the path to a new imperial order. From the hills of Changping, where countless souls remain, the fate of China was decided, and Qin's remaining steps would simply sweep away the weakened remnants on the map. After the war drums of Changping faded and the scent of blood still lingered on the mountain wind, the warring states-nations understood that their greatest enemy was not only Qin, but also themselves. For while Qin grew ever stronger through iron discipline and sweeping reforms, many other states were tearing themselves apart through ambition, intrigue, and endless civil strife. The courts of the feudal lords became blood-stained stages where struggles for power unfolded in the shadows, no less brutal than the slaughter on the battlefield. Chu was the prime example of this fragmentation. A vast nation with abundant resources and a large army, yet rotting from within due to power struggles. Chu's ministers were divided into factions. The royal clan was split. The generals were dissatisfied. Each commanded their own forces, leaving the king unable to control the state as a whole. In the dim corridors of Yingdu, shadowy figures whispered, exchanged secret letters, plotted coups, or schemed to eliminate political rivals. Every struggle for the throne left behind a long trail of corpses hidden in secrecy, and such a court could never withstand the pressure of a Qin that grew stronger with each passing day. Qi also fell into a similar spiral. After the glorious era of Duke Huan of Qi, the state plunged into repeated succession disputes. Princes murdering one another, powerful ministers overthrowing their lords, influential clans taking turns manipulating the court. On freezing winter nights, the oil lamp before the main hall flickered in the wind, casting a dim light on the faces of those plotting their schemes. A general might be poisoned during a victory feast. A minister might be murdered in his own home for uttering one displeasing sentence. Such an atmosphere of suspicion made Qi's political system operate in chaos, like a war chariot with a broken axle. Han, although one of the three states inheriting Jin, was the smallest and under the greatest pressure. They not only had to withstand Qin from the west, but also guard against Wei and Zhao from the north. But instead of focusing on reforms to strengthen themselves, Han was deeply divided by internal court disputes. There were nights when the king of Han sat alone in the vast main hall, hearing only the wind slipping through the wooden doors, unsure of who remained loyal and who had secretly sent letters to the enemy. When people's hearts scatter, even a city wall is hard to defend, let alone an entire nation. While the states sank into palace chaos, a new current quietly grew stronger: national reform, especially the legalist model. Qin was the leading nation in this, with the famous reforms of Shangyang. The changes he introduced were not small administrative orders, but a complete restructuring from top to bottom: remeasuring farmland, standardizing taxes, managing household registration, rewarding military merit by rank, strictly punishing disobedience, promoting agriculture and warfare, weakening the old aristocracy, and increasing the direct power of the central state. Thanks to these reforms, Qin became a fully professional war machine. Soldiers were selected according to merit, not lineage. Every soldier knew that military achievements were the only path to promotion. Officials were tightly supervised, and no one dared neglect their duties. In stark contrast to the decay of other feudal states, Qin was a solid stone block, uncracked by internal turmoil. But reforms did not exist only in Qin. Wei once carried out strong reforms under Marquess Wen of Wei, turning the state into a formidable power. Zhao also adopted new laws and built a powerful cavalry force in the Shandong region. Qi and Chu attempted reforms but were hindered by aristocratic resistance, resulting in half-hearted reforms, too weak to change the foundation, yet strong enough to create resentment and further internal division. In the dark palace corridors, the struggle between tradition and reform raged fiercely. The old aristocrats held land, military power, and prestige, viewing reforms as a direct threat because they weakened their privileges. They resisted, plotted, and even allied with external enemies to overthrow reformist officials. Meanwhile, the commoners, soldiers, and new bureaucratic class supported reforms because they provided opportunities for advancement and protection of their interests. These two forces clashed relentlessly, pushing many states into a state of internal attacks and external sieges. While internal chaos weakened the other states, Qin exploited it as part of its grand strategy. They did not attack head-on immediately, but worked from within, bribing enemy officials, supporting pro-Qin factions in foreign courts, making every decision of their rivals misguided, delayed, or self-destructive. Qin defeated its enemies not only with armies, but also with psychology, politics, and diplomacy. A single clever wedge strategy could ignite fierce internal conflict, draining a rival state's strength without a single arrow being loosed. Modern scholars see the struggle between reform and tradition during the Warring States period as a silent revolution, taking place not through mass uprisings, but through deep structural transformation within the state. Each nation was like a living organism. Those that replaced their blood and boldly removed the rotten parts could survive. Those that clung to the old form were crushed by Qin like dust. History does not choose the strongest, but the fastest to adapt. In this setting, the flickering oil lamps inside the palaces became symbols of national fragility. Every trembling flame in the wind was a wavering of power, a premonition of betrayal that could strike at any moment. The footsteps of eunuchs in the night might signal a decree of dismissal. The unlocking of a prison door might mean the punishment of the losing faction. The kings had to look both toward the frontiers to confront Qin and over their shoulders to guard against their own subordinates. And in that contrast, between the chaotic courts and a Qin with absolute focus, the fate of all under heaven gradually became clear. The Warring States era was determined not only by the Battle of Changping, but also by the invisible wars within the inner palaces and grand halls, where a single word, a nod, or a decree could change the destiny of a nation. Thus, when the war drums once more thundered across the Central Plains, the states marched onto the battlefield with vastly different strengths. Some like chipped swords, others like newly forged spears. And in that race, only one state possessed both the cold resolve of palace politics and the strength of reform to reach the final round, Qin. After the long, exhausting years of palace turmoil and endless battles from the Hebei Plains to the Sichuan valleys, from the forests of Chu to the eastern shores, the Warring States period finally came to an end. And in that relentless race, only one state maintained unwavering momentum, carrying within it the ruthlessness of war and the iron discipline of reform, Qin. As the evening shadows of the 3rd century before the Common Era fell, one state after another was swept off the stage of history, leaving only a single victor advancing steadily toward unification. After Changping, Qin used its overwhelming advantage to launch a series of crushing campaigns. Year after year, one state after another fell into despair. Wei was the first unable to hold on, shattered by the combination of strategy and politics that Qin wielded with mastery. Qin forces crossed the Xian River, breaking Wei's defenses, as if smashing an old brittle jar. Wei collapsed quickly, not only because of Qin's military strength, but also because its internal divisions, half-hearted reforms, and exhausted national spirit left it hollow. Next was Han, the weakest of the 7 states. Han stood between Qin and the remaining states, becoming a piece of meat trapped between 2 blades. Its national strength was depleted, soldiers were few, finances were exhausted. In the palace, the king and ministers quarreled, and the people's loyalty evaporated. When Qin's armies arrived, no one had the strength to resist. With a single brief campaign, Han became the first state officially erased from the map. Zhou, once Qin's rival at Changping, still tried to stand firm, but its spirit was no longer what it had been. The army could not recover from its devastating losses. The people lived in fear. The court was chaotic, factions fighting without end. When Qin attacked again, Zhao trembled like a house rotted from within. A single push was enough to make it collapse. Handan fell. Zhao was destroyed, and those who once prided themselves as descendants of Zhao Shi and King Wuling had nothing left but a sigh of despair. Yan, the northern state, tried to resist through alliances and guerrilla warfare. But Qin was in no hurry. They struck with short blows, cutting off regions one by one, isolating Yan from its allies, pressing until, when Qin's troops neared the capital, the king of Yan sent the crown prince as a hostage in hopes of saving the state. But fate does not side with the weak. Qin marched straight into Yan territory and planted its victory banner before the horrified eyes of its people. A state that once had the strongest navy in the east could not escape the scythe of the age. Chu, vast and rich in resources, had once been considered Qin's greatest rival. But internal divisions, layered power struggles, and a decaying leadership turned Chu into a sick tiger. Qin dispatched a grand strategist to the southern front and launched a long campaign. Although Chu resisted fiercely, human strength has limits, and in the end, Chu was crushed. The lush southern forests became witnesses to the final slaughter between two great states that had fought each other for centuries. Finally, only Qi remained. Once one of the richest and most civilized states. But Qi chose the wrong strategy: isolation, relying on prosperity and its beneficial relationship with Qin, believing Qin would not strike. An entire nation slept in the illusion of peace. When Qin marched in, Qi was almost entirely unprepared. No strategy, no allies, no army strong enough. And the end came as swiftly as a cold wind. Qi fell without even managing to resist. In the year 221 before the Common Era, when the last Qi city opened its gates and the Qin banner flew in the wind, China was officially unified after more than 5 centuries of chaotic warfare. The Eastern Zhou, the dynasty spanning from the spring and autumn period to the warring states, officially ended. A new era began, with a new emperor, one who accepted no sharing of power, Qin Shi Huang. Qin unified not only through military might. They unified through reform, through iron discipline and organization, through a vision ahead of its time. Qin's success was the result of a completely different national model, placing legalism at the center, measuring merit through military achievement, and using strict rewards and punishments to forge a state apparatus as strong as steel. Such a social structure produced disciplined armies, dedicated officials, and a population with clear organizational hierarchy. If the Warring States period was a grand experiment, Qin was the most complete prototype of a centralized state. Meanwhile, the failures of the other states stemmed from stagnation and internal division. Discontented noble clans, incomplete reforms, political infighting, and inconsistent decision-making. They did not lose to Qin in a single battle. They lost in the long national race, where the state that reformed thoroughly would win, and the one that reformed halfway would be crushed. Looking back, the bloodiest age in Chinese history was not only bloody because of its immense casualties, but because it was a period of fundamental transformation in social structure, state models, and the nature of warfare. The warring states taught the states that war was no longer a contest of nobles on chariots, but the operation of an entire society, the synthesis of politics, economics, military strategy, and ideology. War became a system, an industry, a machinery requiring organization at the national level.